Okay, so I think we're at time. Thanks for being there with me today. Today we're going to speak about autonomous mobility in Europe and how we can accelerate the transition, or I would say this revolution toward this new way of moving both passengers and cargo. So maybe very briefly, I'll start by introducing the company we have co-founded, called Goggo Network, who aims to be one of the largest operator of autonomous vehicle fleets in Europe. My name is Yasmine Fage. I'm the co-founder and COO. I used to work previously at McKinsey on different topics, including mobility and also in investment banking. And Martin Varsovsky is a co-founder and CEO, and is a serial entrepreneur that has created a couple of unicorns, 5 exactly so far. And we have with us a large team of professionals from different industries, and I would say not different industry, but different component of or words of the same mobility industry, be it from the established OEMs or the new mobility companies such as Via, Deliveroo, and so on. We've raised so far Series A, 44 million, through SoftBank, which is one of the largest mobility investor in the world, if not the largest, and Axel Springer, who is one of the largest media company in Germany, with the interest for them, or when you don't consume media, when you don't drive, what do you do in the car? You can consume media, so that's also interesting for them. And today we are launching different type of project at scale in different countries in Europe, and I will talk a bit more about that shortly. So I think clearly, and I hope we all agree by now, there's a real revolution that is happening and that will continue to happen in the mobility space. We've been used to travel for a long time with individual internal combustion engine, and now we are moving into a world of shared, electric, and autonomous transport, where cars at the end are not just like box of metal anymore, but more like a cell phone on wheel and connected between each other as our cells are, right? So we're turning cars into networks. So just also to explain a bit, what do we do as a fleet operator? We have 3 main activities. One is, of course, regulation, and I want to talk a bit more about that, because without regulation, we won't be able to accelerate this transition toward autonomous driving. Operations, which is actually trying and doing and showing the world different use cases where autonomy can really bring value and efficiency to different customers and people, and also investing, and it's a different arm in different mobility companies. So at the end of the day, when you need to think about, there are different ways of, different type of autonomy, right? It's not just one thing. There are a lot of use cases, from just like people mover, cargo mover, and then is it like city center? Is it between, city on highway with trucks? Is it, last mile delivery and so on? Is it a robot taxi? Is it just a smaller delivery robot? At the end of the day, autonomy takes a different shape. But what we want to do, and we're starting doing, is actually being able to provide a solution that complies with regulation on these different use cases. And just to give you an example, and I wanted to start with something very concrete, telling you what we do and the type of product we have, so that then you can understand also what those elements will need and how we can also do this transition and acceleration. So we're doing, for instance, from an autonomous food truck that would move autonomously and give food to people, to a small last mile delivery, to actually shuttles that can move people in Paris on let's say not only bus lane, but on let's say dedicated lane. Because at the end of the day, what is hard for an autonomous car is actually to be able to interact with all non-autonomous vehicles, because the human behavior is actually one of the less easy to predict. And so what is harder for an autonomous car is not the environment, the street and so on, but it's also like just being able to move with mixed traffic conditions. So as I was saying, I think before we think about just accelerating autonomy in general, I think it's interesting to look at different use cases, and how those different use cases have, and this is an expected timeline. There are a lot of debates and we can see different, um, opinion on that, but at least that's our team's opinion on what are the different use cases and how likely they are. And of course, everybody talk about robotaxi, and robotaxi is happening in different regions of the world. In Phoenix, you can already order a robotaxi when you get out of the airport, or in Beijing now you have a couple of hundred of autonomous taxi in Singapore, but it's still like at the end one of the hardest thing to do at scale, especially in Europe, because of the complexity of the environment. But there are a lot of other use cases, such as last mile delivery, trucking on dedicated, highway routes, patrolling, working on more like closed site, which is with less like open road traffics. That are use cases that are really happening today, and we continue to grow at scale over the next couple of years. Again, for people that may be not too familiar with what is an autonomous car, or what are the different elements of an autonomous car, this is a bit like the stack of the technology, where you see a mix of, like, of course, sensors such as camera, lidar, and so on. Software, today, like the software, when we say L3, L4, there are like 5 levels of autonomy from L1 to L5. L1 being the least developed, L5 being you're able to drive the car is able to drive autonomously anywhere in the world in any condition, which is almost like utopia. But level 4 is actually, let's say, what is already like almost the end game, which is like you can drive in most environment most of the time, in almost most of the condition, right, without anyone taking control of the wheel except the software of the car. You will see one thing, of course, that you've heard and that is important is like the connectivity, and how, at the end of the day, what is an autonomous car, right? It's like a car that has sensors that receive data point. They have to understand them, interpret them, and then make a decision on what those points means and how they should act, right? So this is the 3 steps. And to do that, of course, to make sure like the signal and the information they receive, and to treat this, to process the information, you need a lot of like connectivity to ensure the latency of the response. You also want the vehicle to be connected so that they can communicate between them, and communicate also with the infrastructure as needed, as an additional redundancy element. So for instance, of course, you have a camera that will be able to see a red light at a traffic light. But if there is also a captor in the red light that sends a signal to the car saying, I'm red, I'm red, I'm red, just to give a simple example, the car will have a double confirmation that this traffic light is red, right? And this is like the most basic example, but just to understand how, at the end of the day, redundancy of information is the most important things for the car, even if they have been able to map and so on the area and know the environment. There are always change that can happen. What is already so that was just to give you an overview of the type of use cases, the basic concept of how the technology works, and now trying to understand what needs to happen at scale and fast, so that we can accelerate this transition. Because today you may have seen a couple of autonomous vehicles where you live, but you will always see them in a very, let's say, pilot test move. It's very hard to see deployment at scale today, mostly because the regulation today doesn't allow for it, right? Because it's kind of a new industry that is totally shifting the paradigm of normal, like, let's say, transportation. And standards are being developed on safety, on responsibility, on, commercial standard as well. And so right now, governments are working on all those regulations, but I think, and that may be one of the most important pillar of how to accelerate this, is really making sure we can do that now proactively, and ensure not just like lengthwise debates on regulation and and waiting until the case is perfect, but doing a bit more like also the US and China are doing, which is actually like, allowing safe for safety, but letting like operation drive a little bit at scale, not just like a pilot. Because the challenge right now is that if you just test a vehicle in a closed environment, or if you just do very, very limited experimentation, how can you scale this? How you have to ensure that like there's a real framework for companies like us and investors to want to invest a lot of money, because as I was saying, it's like cars, it's sensors, it's infrastructure, it's everything, so that you can actually have a service that is liquid, and that where you can actually like with an Uber app order and have a enough density of cars and of superficie or perimeter that is covered by the service to make it an attractive also and useful value proposition, right? So again, say regulation, one of the most important pillar to accelerate. And what we've done, and I think if anyone is interested after this call, I would encourage to download the study. It's a public study that's been developed in collaboration with Roland Berger on how we can organize this regulation, how can we organize autonomous mobility network to scale. Um, and we have assessed different model between like no regulation, making a free market, because it's just also about safety, it's also about commercial regulation. How do we ensure that we can create a market that makes sense for European companies to scale, as well as allowing for foreign technology to come, but that it's not doesn't become like another Google or another Amazon, and that there's no mobility market anymore in Europe. Is just wiped out, where today we are like still one of the leader, if not the leader, of mobility in the world. So this is a bit of a deep dive on, sorry, I expressed too fast. Okay, so this is just a summary on the again on the regulatory front. That is one of the most important, because at the end of the day, this is what will allow and catalyst for investment at scale in the space, development at scale, and then really this acceleration of the transition, and not just sprinkling innovation. So really, again, as I was saying, regulation ex ante of this commercial market, and not a posteriori when it's already done and there's nothing else to do, and there's one monopoly that has won most of the market. Introduce, for instance, a license, like it has been done in the past, to different players to actually orchestrate and organize the service. Making sure there's incentive for companies from the established world, like public sector, public transport authority, OEMs, and new world mobility company like startups, but also like telecom. Like at the end of the day, it's a monster that has different heads, and everybody needs to work together with their skills to make sure this happens, and develop end-to-end mass solution where a service could be integrating with a public transport authority, or allow people to take their car but then leave it and have another solution. So it's like going A, B, C, D, not just like a small area where you can have an autonomous car, but if it's not like bringing a full stack solution, it's not helpful. So really encouraging this conversation at the local level, and then of course making sure that there are solutions, and to ensure at all level, the monitoring of the operators, the monitoring of the data that is gathered both on geolocalization, but also what is the data of the consumer that is consumed within the car, and making sure that at the end of the day, any emergency, anything is shared between operators, and that there's like a safety control platform that can allocate and warn the different services. So of course, like when we think about autonomous driving and why it's a topic that is also so dear to us, is at the end of the day, we are convinced that the transition toward autonomous and shared services and electric will allow for this so wished ecological transition, because right now you have 1.2, 1.4 average occupancy of people in the car, 1.2 being more the norm, and 95% of the time your car is parked without use. And so the moment you start at least just being able to put two people in one car at the same time, and then you remove traffic, you remove so much of pollution, you allow for like efficiency and just time lost in traffic for the economy, used productively or at least for leisure. um, and of course, if it's with electric car, which is what's happening, you really ensure this transition also toward like clean energy. So that's really another very important element, both like ecology and transition, car sharing, and making sure at the end of the day, by regulating, you will stimulate the response of investors and of operator like us to actually invest in product and services at scale, and create this new service and industry in Europe. So that's it for the presentation. I think thanks for the time. I think we have now time for Q&A. So I will connect to that and be happy to answer any question or pursue the debate. Thank you very much.